So, this is going to be an unpopular personal opinion, and it's not the way I intended to start this series, but life events made this the first topic. 4 days ago, my daughter was born prematurely. She's 3 weeks early. She's doing fine. Mother's doing fine. And one day after she was born, in the social media feeds that I look for my political face, there was a discussion about abortion. Now, regardless of what you feel about the topic, is not germane to what we're talking about. I'm simply using it because it's what inspired this observation of mine. So let me begin by saying, this isn't actually a post about abortion, just abortion was the springboard. Okay, now we have that out of the way. The argument being presented for the pro-choice position in this thread was logically faulty. I mean, it was bad. And all I did in the thread was point that out, and suddenly the entire thread was calling me a closeted Christocratic theodogue. I believe that's how the gentleman was making up his words for the accusation. Women in the thread were calling me a misogynist. Other people were throwing all kinds of tropey pro-choice positional memes at me, such as, well, if you're really pro-life, you should also be government subsidies for food, education, all this stuff for the kids, and mandatory adoptions, and blah, blah, blah. And none of the people that were responding actually heard what I said about the logic of the argument, which was my only objection. What causes that? Human beings, because of the way our species has evolved, are exposed in their very early life to the fact that if they do not please conform to their parents' and family's wishes, they will die. If you think back to the Neolithic and Paleolithic, our ancestors were in a constant fight for survival. And if you're a child, you are hyper aware of that. You think stress makes children do weird things now. Imagine the constant stress to survive does. Right? Especially if everything's bigger and badder and has more teeth than you. We learn very quickly that to displease our parents and our family is to invite death. And so we avoid it. And we grow up during our lives internalizing that fear. We internalize the fear of being different because it can lead to consequences we cannot absorb. I should say endure. Forgive me. Talking off the top of my head today. That feature of our psychology as we age extends to social groups. We fear to upset our peers, that we might be ostracized because it feels like a social death. We fear to offend our boss because we might lose our job, therefore we might lose our prestige, our house, our livelihood, etc., etc. We fear it in politics for reasons I'm not quite sure. Especially in the representative government system, where the people holding office are supposed to tell the populace how it is they'll vote, so the populace can decide whether they want that representative in that seat. It never seems to work out that way, though. Can't wonder why. Greed! Sorry. But more shocking to me than this very negative experience on the political side of social media that I frequent, was when I came into the esoteric groups that same day. I have multiple accounts for multiple interests, because it's been my experience that people that find you interested in one thing can't understand why you're interested in another. People that were professing enlightened magicians were behaving the exact same way and using the exact same memes. Yeah. Weird, isn't it? It's almost like they aren't really enlightened. I mean, that can't be. They've spent their time reading the Book of the Law and performing all the rites from Book 4. They They surely must know. I mean, they're the high wicked muckety muck of the trailer park covenant. I mean, they must know. I mean, etc., etc. But the need to belong, the need to be part of something bigger, has turned off the critical faculties of their mind. And they're not thinking about what they're saying. Case in point, sticking with abortion. One of the things I've noticed about the abortion issue is that if you dare speak out against abortion in any way, if you dare speak about restricting it in any manner, the first charge that's labeled against you is misogyny. That's not logical, especially not given, and granted, many of the objections are religious in nature, but especially given that there are arguments against abortion that have nothing to do with religion or gender, but instead have to do with human rights. This is particularly something you'll find among strict constitutionalists, who, although they won't quote the Constitution, they'll quote the Declaration and its promise of, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, and they're given by the Creator certain equal rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They'll quote the Declaration as being a goal of the founders of the United States, and that should be a law of the land. Well, that's not an argument to religion, is it? God is invoked in it because of the speech of the time period, but you could just as easily say all human beings have these things because they're human beings, and the logic of the statement still stands. Try to tell that to someone who's rabidly pro-choice, though, who is so extreme in their view that they believe abortion should be accessible up until birth, and you'll have a reaction, all right. And it's one thing to say, well, that's only amongst the extremists. It's not anymore. I have seen people thrown out of houses by other family members because of a political stance. Not just necessarily abortion. It could be tax rates. It could be your position on what's commonly called corporate welfare. It could be your position on what is called social justice. Right? Families tearing themselves apart over someone having a belief that ultimately will be decided by the vote and really should be coming between the family members. Now, if that's happening amongst family members, imagine in magical lodges. Right? I had an experience once where I nearly got thrown out of a lodge for enforcing the rules of the lodge. Something that everybody's supposed to agree to when they sign on to be members. You add something explosive like this that's a political hot button, and jeez. There's something about magicians who commonly say that they are seeking enlightenment and clarity of thought and, oh yeah, the mastery of their ego, that they seem to often act in undisciplined, unregulated, hedonistic, impulsive, and ultimately egotistical manners. Maybe it's true we're always pursuing that thing we don't think we'll ever have. But when you're talking about magicians and how the world might view us, and not only that, but if a magician actually has some power, we gotta be better than that. The cult of belonging, the need to belong to a group, because somehow by being a member of the group, you feel righteous, or you feel better prepared, or you feel empowered, is a feature of cults. That is the main critique magicians often label at the church, isn't it? Well, these people aren't really being religious, they're just being cultic in practice and letting someone else doing their thinking for them. That is the common disagreement magicians have with your average Sunday-going churchgoer, or your average Muslim, or your average Jew, or your average Baha'i, or your average Buddhist. the general idea is that you've accepted these thought forms and these restrictions from people who you've never met, who didn't have your best interest at heart, and think that you're being holy. How is that any different from people allowing politics to do the same thing to them? And it's not. And here's where it'll really take a turn about how I view this, and I encourage you to listen to this very carefully. There is an intersection between politics and magic. You often hear in the esoteric communities that a spell is nothing more than someone's thought given their will and then put into action, right? Well, if that's what let's call it a spell is, a bunch of people thinking about something so that it'll happen and taking action so it'll happen, isn't that the same thing as a bill on the floor of Congress? Isn't that the same thing as an act of government? Yeah. I mean, there's no Enochian calls or anything, but the essential basic formula is still there, isn't it? A bunch of people want something to happen, they get together, they do a form of ceremony, i.e., writing the bill and getting the vote, and the next thing you know, bam! The world is different. Now that intersection requires the people involved in its process hopefully are sane, hopefully are virtuous, and hopefully are wise. Have you seen any of that in government lately? No, I don't think so. We magicians owe the world better conduct, owe it more effective action, and we especially owe it not to be a slave to these thought structures and restrictions, these paradigms of ignorance that have always held people in the world back. And I think that's going to be the end of that off-the-cuff ramble. The worrisome part, though, for me is that, although my point was to talk about this strange intersection of politics and magic and what was the springboard for it, if you're listening to this and you're still wondering what my stance is on abortion, you kind of missed the point and are showing that you are a slave to that paradigm of the political tribes, aren't you?